On this episode of On the Bridge, I'm chatting with Francesca Webster, who is the editor of Superyacht Times. Hi, Francesca.
Hello.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so the majority of people in the superyacht industry will know the Superyacht Times. Perhaps you can tell us about how you ended up in the position of editor.
Yeah, so well, as you say, the Superyacht Times is a very well-known media publication now. Almost slightly ironically, despite having been in the yachting industry for nearly 8-9 years before I joined the company, I had no idea that it was Dutch. I assumed because the language it's written in is English.
Yeah.
I thought, like some of our competitors, that it was a London-based publication. And I had been writing about yachts from a historical perspective for an owner before I joined the company. And I was sort of looking for my next role, looking to be part of a sort of dynamic team, a young team that was doing interesting things. And I think it was a LinkedIn post. They were looking for a writer. And it was one of those moments where I was looking for my next job. I was still employed, and this thing came up on LinkedIn, and it was looking for a writer who had worked on yachts, that lived in Amsterdam, that had academic background. And I was looking at this thing thinking, this is describing me. Like, this is really
box.
It's really surreal. And I actually messaged Marijn de Waard, the founder of Superyacht Times, on LinkedIn and said, I'd really love to meet you, and I'm based in Amsterdam, and can I come by the office? And I think I'd be a good fit for this role. And I came into the office, and he and the commercial director at the time met with me, and we just had a great chat. We had a good rapport. The interview went really well. And Marijn called me the next day and said, can you come back in? And offered me the role as a writer in the editorial department. Superyacht Times wasn't the scale that it is now then.
Sure.
We're now about 38, 39 people.
How long ago was that you...
That was 4 years ago that
Right.
I joined. So it was sort of just the tail end of COVID, coming out of that whole period. And the company was sort of looking to go through expansion, but they only had 1 or 2 people in the editorial department at the time. So they were looking to replace one of the 2. And I joined, loved it, just really felt that was the right place for me to be. And I could see that there was a lot of potential for expansion within the scope of what we were doing in the editorial department, and was kind of coming up with ideas all the time about what we could do differently. And 6 weeks in to the role, Marijn texted me saying, can you come upstairs, please? And I was going, oh God, I've done something wrong. I'm going to get fired for sure. And he offered me the role of editor-in-chief. So it was a huge leap of faith for him and a very exciting opportunity for me. So I jumped in with 2 feet, really.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
You must have just not known what to say. You must have been so shocked.
I was incredibly shocked. It was a complete head trip. I called my mum immediately, as you do.
Yeah.
As you do. And I was 26 at the time. So it was firstly like, oh my God, this is going to be a huge responsibility. How do I take that in the most kind of grown-up way that I can, and also manage what was undoubtedly a huge amount of imposter syndrome when that whole process happened. And Marijn is a visionary. He's known in the industry as a very visionary person, and always looking forward into the future about what could be the next thing, what could we do differently, and how can we change up the landscape of media and try new things. So for him to then put his faith in a 26-year-old, say, okay, can you make this a reality, and build the team and do some really exciting stuff, was awesome. It was amazing.
That's so interesting. But I'm sure when you saw the advert on LinkedIn and something in the advert made you think that is a place that sounds where I could fit and, do good work and make a change. And then when he comes to you, having that faith from someone that you've built a good relationship with, hopefully made you feel like you weren't such an imposter, because he obviously had a vision of what you could bring to the Superyacht Times, not just the other way around.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I definitely can't speak for what he saw in me. Thank God he did, whatever it was. I mean, I'm very relieved.
I'm sure he's relieved too.
Yeah,
4 years down the line.
Yeah, I hope so. And our relationship has continued to be very solid, and we worked together really nicely. I was talking to someone from a shipyard yesterday who said, you know, it really feels like you're a team.
Yeah.
And what you do together, you know, Marion and yourself, you're pushing the company forward all the time, you know, with the team that we have around us. And that's really special for me to hear as well, that, you know, Marion's been in the business since he was 18 and the company turns 20 next year. So it's not a fledgling thing. You know, he was also putting his baby in my hands in some respects. So that was, you know, very special and a big responsibility and very intimidating. And, you know, it's been really exciting. The wonderful thing is, and, you know, it speaks volumes for him, is that he's really put faith in me to kind of change things and try and do things differently and, you know, continue with the reputation that the company had and not break it. You know, it's always the thing in media that if you lose the faith of the industry once and you break that trust, it's very difficult to get it back.
Yeah, especially in a very private industry such as the one we work in.
Absolutely. And, you know, the industry is reputation driven in so many respects. And the reputation of the company is very solid and it's done really well. And, you know, that's based on his sort of methodology for the way that he works and something that I've taken very seriously.
I think also as a business owner, like you mentioned, he, you know, it's turning 20. So that's been his life for almost 2 decades. And when you have your own business and you bring in new people, it can take a while to not to trust them, but to feel comfortable to hand over responsibility because, like you say, reputation is so important. But actually then sometimes bringing someone in with fresh eyes can just accelerate the progress of what you're trying to achieve anyway. And I feel from the outside, Superyacht Times has a trusted, reliable reputation, which has been always in place. So you've obviously been a good gatekeeper of that as editor in the last 4 years.
Yeah, I think, you know, that's the most challenging. You kind of put your finger on it there. It's like maintaining that reputation, but also expanding the portfolio of what we do as a business, you know, trying new things. And, you know, we're very lucky that the reputation we have enables people to put faith in us. And that's something, you know, we introduced a new publication, you know, media, the landscape has been changing so much in the last 10 years, 5 years, even the last 4 years has changed massively. And, you know, print is constantly a sort of do we, don't we? Is it something to invest in? Is it not? And, you know, we've actually doubled down on print in the last 3 years and introduced a new publication that's targeted at the suppliers and the sort of behind the scenes of the sector.
I know it well.
Yeah, how to
we've
build it.
We've advertised in it and we get it. It's great.
Yeah, and that was a leap of faith for the advertisers like yourselves who've put money into it, but it's done absolutely brilliantly. Like, we've been blown away by the success of that. You know, Justin Ratcliffe is a really trusted editor and writer, and he and I together managed that, and it's done really well. But you couldn't do that. You couldn't just create that without already having the existing reputation that Superyacht Times had. It would be very, very difficult to kind of come in, and especially as we're looking at the intricacies behind yacht construction, for example, it's like, you know, that you're also holding the faith of the shipyards in your hands and the owners in your hands the whole time.
Okay, so I want to take a step back because I love that story of how you came to work there and then ended up as editor in 6 weeks. I think that must be the fastest multiple promotion ever.
It's a bit of a shock,
Yeah, but when I was researching you for today, you had a really interesting sort of pre-career before the Superyacht Times.
Yeah, I really stumbled into the yachting industry. It was actually a complete accident and has been a kind of funny thing when I bump into people in, you know, when I'm at regattas and stuff, and like, God, this is a while ago, but God, you're actually working on board boats, but I tried to teach you how to sail when you were 11 and you were awful. Like, how did you
like,
end
I'm
up
not
here?
driving the boats, luckily.
Exactly. But my brother was a captain when he was 22 at the time, I was 18, and I was between university and between school and university. And he was working as a captain in Greece, and I literally turned up on the dock one day and said, hey, this looks like a lot of fun. I want to get involved, and how do I do this?
As you do at that age.
As you do when you've got no inhibitions and you're sort of like, anything is possible. I definitely wouldn't have the kahunas to do that now, but I was really...
You don't have any responsibility either,
exactly,
so it doesn't matter if something doesn't work.
You've got no reason not to try.
Exactly.
And I got on the boat and, I got the job, and we ended up running charter boats in Greece and Croatia together for 4 years, 4 big seasons. And that was a remarkable experience, being with the Jays and working, with these elite sailors and having a lot of fun and really seeing the industry from a different perspective. And it was there that I got introduced to the classics, the classic sailing yachts. And when it kind of came to what to do next, as I think it's about 2017, how do I take my next step? And I tried to work in London and just really, it hadn't fit. Couldn't square peg round hole kind of situation. And I went back onto boats and I got onto big classics, and the owner that I had started working for had 9 yachts in various stages of restoration. He was sort of buying up hulls that had been from the 1910 Olympic class and restoring them gradually. And he had 2 classic super yachts, both sailing yachts. And we just had a great rapport and a really good relationship. And he was into the classical history, which is what I studied at university. And so we would talk about history and really nerdy things like that on the boat in the evenings. And, we just had a great relationship. And I decided to move to Amsterdam. I'd loved it here. I'd been to visit when I was 21 and thought it was wonderful and had been trying to work out how to make that happen. And the owner, when I left the boat, said, look, I really want you to come back and I've got this idea, and would you come and become the in-house historian for the fleet? And it was incredible. It was the most amazing opportunity. The fruition of that role was that I wrote a very hefty history book about one of his boats, which weighs a ton and sits in the corner of my living room and occasionally gets opened. But that was a pretty extraordinary experience. So working on my own, and I spent 2 years chasing this 100-year-old boat around the world to all the places that she'd been. And it taught me so much.
I can imagine
meeting people,
traveling and meeting so many different people.
Yeah, meeting people who, the yachting industry in the 1970s was a totally different landscape to what it is now. And she was one of the only restored classic yachts at the time. So lots of the captains who then ended up working on the biggest motor yachts in the world had cut their teeth on board this boat. So she touched a lot of lives in that era. Nick Edmiston was one of the guys that sold the boat. So I called him when I was going through not really realizing quite how significant a person he is. And, that kind of thing opened a lot of doors as well when I went to Superyacht Times, because people knew me as the girl who'd been researching these boats.
All the people that all these doors that opened sort of at the right time that led you to that place, but then actually put you in really good stead when you 100%. Were there. So your day-to-day role, what are the things you most enjoy and what are the challenges you found? Because I would imagine as a young female who did a job for 6 weeks and got promoted to one of the sort of most powerful jobs in media in the industry, I'm sure there's been some interesting challenges you've had to overcome and skills you've had to learn. So tell me a bit more about the day-to-day of the role and then the bits you like and the bits you found challenging.
Well, the role has obviously evolved hugely. And, you mentioned before, the landscape of the industry has changed dramatically in the last 4 years. Not Superyacht Times alone, but the whole industry has been through a major evolution. And, we've had some very good years as a sector. It's been very positive in the market. That has a knock-on effect to the media, ad sales, all of those things benefit us, general interest in other parts of the industry, awareness around things like supply chain challenges. And, that has changed, the landscape has changed. And so it was definitely like learning how to manage new elements that we hadn't introduced to the company before, such as how to build it, how can we open up our readership to a different sector, but also just from a fundamental aspect of being a young woman who hadn't managed anyone directly before, and how to understand, and it's still something I'm learning now, and I don't get it right all the time, and I definitely make mistakes in the process of managing other people and other people's aspirations and expectations. It's a constant development and something I'm constantly learning. So, you know, that's always a challenge, and it's really exciting and something I enjoy a lot. My day-to-day role when I joined the company was very fundamentally producing content, and that was, you know, what I was responsible for. As my team has grown from one person to, I think there's about 9, because I also I introduced a social media content team, which we didn't have before, which has obviously become increasingly important.
Of course, yeah, central nowadays.
Central, but hadn't existed previously. So that was, you know, a big thing, having a dedicated social media person. And, you know, managing all of those different independent roles has been very challenging. But now my role has sort of evolved into also kind of building the network of Superyacht Times as the company, as the reputation has been really solidified. It's also how can we introduce new businesses to us and make them aware of what we're doing and how we can help them and what we can do to tell their stories and be an advocate for the sector as well. So that's, you know, that I really love. So I spend a lot of time traveling, a lot of time networking, obviously going to all the shows. And we've also introduced events in the last 2 years, which we didn't have before. And a big part of my role is running big section swathes of those events and making sure that everything goes smoothly on stage and then being on stage as well. So that was public speaking. Hadn't done that before. And, you know, that's a whole, this kind of thing.
You've become almost a sort of representation of what Superyacht Times is rather than the sort of actual content creation.
Yeah, that's how I would love it to be, you know, and that's definitely how I would love for my role to continue to evolve, you know, to represent who we are and what we do and how, as I said, how we can really tell the best stories in the industry for those companies that operate within this sector.
What significant changes have you seen in the industry, especially ones that have affected your role now and media in general?
Yeah, I think, God, there have been so many, you know, as you were saying before, this period has been a huge shift in dynamics within the sector, within design, within the market. You know, obviously having COVID was a massive disruptor, but it also then ended up being this explosive opportunity in terms of the market. But it also changed the way that people approach their yachts completely. You know, going from yachting as a status symbol or yachting as something kind of flashy to show off to your friends, it became, okay, well, actually yachting is the opportunity for me to be with my friends and my family in a very intimate setting and have that level of privacy and live on board and work on board. You know, things like Starlink, even in the last 2 years, have totally changed the landscape of design as well. You know, I spend a lot of time talking to yacht designers about the developing trends in their segment and how people interact with their yachts, interact with the environment around their boats is obviously shifting completely and has shifted very dramatically. You know, one of the biggest things that we see is this sort of the accumulation of businesses by one another. You know, there's so much consolidation going on, and that's really changing the landscape of every sector of the industry, whether it's yacht management, brokerage, and, you know, even media. We've just seen a major acquisition from a much bigger company for one of our competitors, and that changes the landscape of what we're doing. You know, ironically, it's actually been very positive, I think, for us, and hopefully will continue to be, because we're seen as being very independent, and that's something that is deeply important to Marine and, you know, and myself and all of our management team and all of the staff at Superyacht Times. You know, remaining independent and remaining transparent.
And that is easier if you stay smaller.
Absolutely.
Yeah, as soon as you're bigger. And what about trends in the industry? So like you say, you get access to chat with lots of designers and management companies and probably hear lots of things that maybe they're not necessarily sharing in public. So what sort of trends have you noticed over the last few years or upcoming?
I think, you know, as I was saying, that the interaction between owners and especially their environment has changed a lot. You know, it used to be that there was a big impetus on inside spaces, especially in design, you know, interior volumes, that was very important, and how much space you had inside the boat. And now it's like, let's minimize the interior volumes, let's get lots of glass, let's, you know, be right on the water, have hydraulic terraces and You know, the guys at RWD have done some genius stuff by introducing the beach club and making that something that's accessible for smaller yachts as well as much bigger boats. So that's definitely been a development. You know, I've just come from the Super Yacht Forum, and sustainability is the topic. And
as always,
it's slightly frustratingly, you know, because there's a lack of tangibility. You know, you can't. It's very hard to understand it from how it's actually going to impact us. But you know, there are some amazing innovations going on, and there are some amazing companies that are very forward-thinking, especially when it comes to reuse and refit and conversion. And I think we'll be seeing a huge amount more of that naturally, because the global fleet is aging dramatically. You know, the majority of the fleet are over 15 years. So people coming up with very clever ideas about what we can do with what we have, I think is going to be a big focus in the coming years.
How do you see the future of organisations like Superyacht Times, and obviously there are other competitors out there, developing in the coming years with regard to the way they're communicating with the industry?
Oh God, communication. I actually was just having lunch with Espen and talking about the fact that communication has become everything's so accessible, you know, whether it's social media or, you know, technology is always at our fingertips. We've got our phones in our hands, and if anything, it's actually got way more complicated, and things are becoming harder to communicate, despite the fact that we have so many more tools to do it. I think it's going to be a continuous challenge, how to communicate the right message and how to get your message across in the best way possible. You know, when we're living in a world where social media is like dominant, so dominant.
Sometimes it feels as if, because there's so many options, we're almost flooded with information.
100%. You know, one of the biggest challenges that I have now with the team as well is, when I joined the company, we were probably producing between 5 and 8 articles a day. And that was, you know, the main scope of the business then was reporting on the market and the business of yachting and, you know, design and obviously launches and that kind of thing, what's happening in the global fleet. But over the last 4 years, we've really opened up the portfolio of what we produce, which means we're producing between 10 and 14 articles a day. You know, it's almost doubled in some cases. But scaling that back when the industry expects us, you know, if there's a merger or an acquisition, they want to have their story out there. And because we've opened up our readership to the supply chain, they also want to be represented.
Sure.
So it's how do you limit what you're doing while still sharing enough of the right thing that people want to read? So
the quality, not always quantity, but then I guess there is a lot of quantity.
There's a huge amount of quantity also, purely because the industry's been so successful in the last couple of years as well. You know, the boom in the market has led to lots of yacht sales, and our Superyacht Times' bread and butter was the market. So you can't just stop reporting on that.
No, because you've probably got a good % of readership that still go to you 100%. For that.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can't just cut that out. But you know, quality over quantity is, I think, going to be a continuous challenge, and something that we need to constantly consider and need to revise all the time. You know, that will definitely be, we don't know what the market's going to do next year, but either way, you know, trying to continue to produce high quality content that adds value. That's, you know, how do we do that when there's so much going on? So
and writing with integrity, in the sense, still reporting and things that are happening, like you mentioned. There's been some events that have happened over the last few years that, you know, are very impactful on the industry, but you have to write about them in a sensitive way because lives are affected because of the events that have happened. So keeping an integrity, reporting on things that are important without it coming across in a sort of negative way.
Yeah, I mean, you know,
I guess that's difficult because sometimes there are...
The reality is that we, you know, if we're going to have editorial integrity, we have to report on the events that happen, even if they're bad, you know. That's the reality of what we do. We're not, you know, we are a media company for the super yacht industry, but we're not a positivity echo chamber. We can't just say the good things all the time. You know, we have to be transparent
and impartial
into what's happening. So, you know, that's a constant negotiation and conversation that we have with shipyards. And, you know, why did you have to report that? And it's like, well, actually, that's
really tough.
The news
but it's your job, isn't
it? You know, it's what we're here for.
Yeah.
And people expect us to be honest and transparent, and we can't just suddenly stop that. So, that's very important to all of us as well.
What advice would you give someone looking to get into media in the super yacht industry?
I think it's probably the same advice I'd give to anyone who wants to get into the yachting industry. I think, you mentioned earlier that as a young woman in the role that I have, when I first started going to boat shows and things with Superyacht Times, people were kind of like, why are you talking to me? Why you're this young woman who's suddenly a journalist and doing this role and not really taking me seriously. And I think I really fell back on the value of having worked on yachts. That was and is to this day extremely important for me being taken seriously in the role that I have. Having the capability or the understanding of what is a GA and why is it important, and what's it like to be crew on board a boat, and what are shipyard periods like for owners and for crew and for designers. And even just having dipped my toe into that in different periods has given me a sort of bit of ammunition, going into conversations, and that's obviously developed. But I really felt people change their whole demeanor when they realized that I'd done time on boats as well. So that was a great value. And I've got the majority of my team. We're 38 people at Superyacht Times. 3 of us have worked on board. When I joined, no one had worked on board. Everyone was new to the industry. So I would say read as much as you can. Make yourself as well informed as possible, because at the end of the day, if you're going to be telling the stories of the industry, you need to understand how those stories work. And we are a people industry, without a doubt. No matter. We have a lot of focus on the product itself, the super yacht. The aesthetics is very important, but it's the people that run the industry, whether it's the crew, the designers, the shipyards, that make it happen, that actually make everything fit together. So trying your best to understand as much as you can of the different elements and the different sectors within the wider industry, I think will arm you very well for anything that you want to do in yachting.